and welcome to the lineup. Today is April the 14th, 2022. I'm Barry Stagner, and a couple of things before we jump in. First of all, those who follow on social media, thank you for your prayers. As many of you are aware, we had kind of a Murphy's Law vacation last week, and it just seemed like one thing after the other happened. We got stuck in Atlanta for 2 days after the airline canceled our flights and missed a couple of days down in Florida, spending it with our family and just a very interesting time. We did wind up having a great time once we arrived down in Marco Island, Florida. But boy, it was a journey getting there. And then kind of up and coming, if you're a part of Calvary Chapel Tustin, most of you are well aware, next Wednesday at check in at 6 a.m., but somewhere around 8 or 8:30, I'm going to have hip replacement surgery. So I'm going to be off the grid, hopefully for only a week. I'm hoping to be back in a condition to where I can endure sitting and doing the program, and hoping only to miss a couple of weeks at church. I'm actually getting kind of a new procedure. It's not new, but having already had one hip replacement, I have a congenital defect that didn't allow, or my hip sockets didn't form properly and wore the ball out on both my hips. One of them I had back in 2012 replaced, and the other was supposed to last about 4 years, but here I am 10 years later, and just now getting it replaced this Wednesday. But it's called the anterior method, and they come in and from a different angle. They don't cut any of the muscles, which last time they did. Couldn't tie my shoes or bend over or lift my leg or anything for 30 days, so it's not to tear the muscles, but this is supposed to have a better and easier recovery time. So I'm hoping to be back and only miss a week. Obviously, having surgery on Wednesday, I won't be with you next Thursday, but after that, we'll see what happens. Hopefully, I can get back at this the week after that. So again, I'd appreciate your prayers with that. This has been just a real, pardon the pun, but a pain. And it's kept me from doing the walks that my wife and I have long enjoyed, and just really looking forward to kind of getting back to full health on a lot of different levels, including getting out and exercising once again. So, with that, let's move on to our stories this week. And the first comes from the Times of Israel, and the headline reads: "Vandalized site of Joseph's tomb restored in rare daytime operation." Previous renovations have taken place under the cover of darkness, and one Palestinian was killed in clashes with the IDF at the site. And the West Bank shrine, believed by some to be the tomb of biblical Joseph, which has been vandalized twice in the past few days by Palestinians amid rising tensions with Israel, was restored and renovated Wednesday morning in a rare daytime operation. Several construction teams arrived at the Nablus site, accompanied by military forces from the Samaria Brigade. It was coordinated in advance with the civil administration, which is overseeing the operation. And as they entered the compound, rocks were thrown toward Israeli vehicles. Similar visits to renovate the site in 2010 and 15 were conducted under the cover of darkness so as to avoid unnecessary clashes with the Palestinians in the area. And the Palestinian Red Crescent Emergency Service said 31 Palestinians were hurt in clashes with Israeli forces near the site Wednesday morning, and the authorities' health ministry later said one had actually died. In a separate incident, 6 Palestinians were reportedly injured during clashes with the Israeli military at the village of Beita near Nablus as part of an extensive military arrest operation in the West Bank. And forces also entered the Palestinian villages of Jenin, Tulkarm, Nablus, and Urif, and Kabatia, and Jabba, the military said. And Wednesday's daytime operation in Joseph's tomb was the first of its kind since former Prime Minister Ehud Barak handed over control of the site in 2000 to the Palestinian police, which pledged to keep the shrine's integrity and prevent any damage to it. And again, considering the fact that there's been so many terrorist attacks in Israel against Israeli citizens over the past 2 weeks, and now here we are headed into the second Friday of Ramadan. And remember, it's Muslims pray on Friday evening, and that's a significant day in their calendar, weekly calendar. And there's an expected escalation of things, and you would not be surprised by attacks like this on sacred sites to the Jews. during this particular season. And a couple of other stories we're going to talk about here in a few moments that tie into this. And I want to kind of put a bow around it all and bring it together here in a minute. Our second story comes from the Algeminer, and the headline reads, Top Iranian nuclear scientist claims Israel threatens daily to bomb Iran, which justifies their weapons program. Now, if you remember, we've had multiple stories over the years of Iran saying our intentions with our nuclear program are strictly energy related. We have no aspirations to create a nuclear weapon. And now here this top scientist says our weapons program is justified because of the threats coming daily from Israel. A top Iranian nuclear scientist falsely claimed that Israel has threatened to use a nuclear weapon against Iran and that Iran's nuclear program is essential to establish deterrence and force the world to accede to its demands. And according to a translation by Memory TV, Dr. Mahmoud Reza Agamiri, the head of the nuclear engineering department at Shahid Bashiti University in Tehran, said in an April 9th lecture, not a day passes when I say this. It means that it may have happened or is happening this morning without Israel saying that if needed, it will use a nuclear bomb against Iran. Israel has never made such a threat. Agamiri claimed Iran needs a nuclear weapon to counter such threats. Even in the case of Ukraine, you saw that Russia threatened that if it could not reach an agreement under certain conditions, the option of a nuclear bomb exists. And Putin has that nuclear suitcase, and Russia would use this option, he said. Now, what does this mean? Answering his own question, Agamiri continued, it means that something might happen in the world, and unless you have the required protection, you might become the victim. So this is a constant threat against any country that cannot defend itself. And today you have the deterrence capability, he said, of Iran. Now, interesting again, as I pointed out a moment ago, this has been denied and denied and denied. And even as the renegotiations of the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action have just drug on and on and on, and Iran making unrealistic demands, including that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps be removed from the U.S. Terrorist list, and all these other things, which are simply stall tactics for them to continue to enrich uranium to a weapons grade status. Now, the Jerusalem Post is reporting that Israel says Iran has nearly enough uranium for a bomb as talks remain stuck. Iran is close to having enough enriched uranium for a weapon as negotiations to return to the 2015 nuclear deal remain stuck, a diplomatic source said on Wednesday. The Islamic Republic is very close to having a significant quantity of enriched uranium, meaning enough to produce one bomb, and a red line set by Western parties to the talks. While Iran is not yet enriching uranium to weapons-grade material at 90% purity, larger quantities of uranium enriched to a lower purity can be enough for a bomb. And Jerusalem's assessment is that Iran is close to having a significant quantity of uranium enriched to 60%. Negotiations for the U.S. and Iran return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action of 2015 ended weeks ago, with Iran making a demand outside of the nuclear agreement, and what I mentioned a moment ago about the Revolutionary Guard Corps being removed from the U.S. Foreign Terrorist Organization list. Washington has not yet officially responded to the demand, but a State Department spokesperson said last week that the U.S. president views the IRGC Quds Force as a terrorist organization. And thus far, none of the Europeans' proposals for a compromise or alternative agreement between the Americans and Iranians have been accepted by the Iranians, who have made removing the IRGC's FTO designation basically the backbone for the agreement, a diplomatic source said. Israeli officials have also asked European interlocutors, to ensure that another of Iran's demands not be met, and that the International Energy Agencies, open investigations of possible military dimensions of Iran's nuclear program not be closed for political reasons, which could set a dangerous precedent. And the P5+1 negotiated with the U.S. and Iran for 11 months to return to compliance with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which restricted Tehran's uranium enrichment to 3.67% and cut almost all its stockpile of enriched uranium in exchange for gradually lifting sanctions. Now, again, to have a significant amount enriched to 60%, this takes time. It's a slow process. It's kind of interesting. There's two isotopes in the uranium, the U-235 and the U-238. One is fissile and the other is not, and they basically separate the two by spinning them in a centrifuge, and the heavier material goes to the outside. They suck with a vacuum out the lighter isotope on the inside, and it goes through another process where the same thing is repeated. That's what centrifuges do. The technology is complex, but the process is basically simple. It's just, like a beater. You just turn the fan on and it throws the heavier material towards the outside, and they keep this process repeated and repeated and repeated until the concentration is heavy enough to have enough fissile material for it to the atoms to split and all these other things for it to become a nuclear weapon. So again, in order for them to do this process is slow and laborious and takes time. So that means they've been enriching uranium the whole time that they have been supposedly negotiating with the U.S. and the P5+1. And their intentions have always been to create a nuclear weapon because they've made no bones about the fact that they want to see the Israelites wiped out and driven into the sea. And again, it seems like only the Western cultures don't seem to understand that the threats that they make are real. It's not simply hyperbole. It's not just saber rattling. It is their goal, and they're doing everything they can to reach it. And now they've used Russia as a validation for their own actions to say, see what happened with Russia? They used it as a deterrent to drive people to the negotiating table and basically held it over the heads of the Ukrainians that, if you don't, we'll nuke you. If you don't come to the table and agree to our demands, we'll nuke you. And they're saying, you know what, we have the right and we have the need to do this as well. So, watching all this happen and remembering that, we've got some major things that are developing in the realm of Bible prophecy, many of which are going to happen and be fulfilled ultimately during the tribulation, but we're seeing the precursors to it now. And we've been talking last week, especially in the previous week before that, we went on vacation. We talked about prophecy perplexities. And if you'd like to watch that on YouTube, I encourage you to go do so, because we address the questions that are debated issues and tried to come up with some concrete answers. But we also made the point last week that, during the Passion Week, just a compact 7-day period, there was just a flurry of biblical prophecies being fulfilled. And they were all centered around the fact that Jesus was being declared for the first time as the Messiah of Israel, publicly and openly, as the blessed one who comes in the name of the Lord, as the crowds chanted, Baruch Hashem Adonai. And all these things were being fulfilled in a relatively compact period of time. And overall, Jesus' whole lifespan, the Isaiah 7:14 prophecy, the Isaiah 53, Micah 5:2, Isaiah 11:1, all these prophecies were being fulfilled just within the spans of the 33 years that Jesus lived on earth. And here we are at a time where things are happening rapidly and many things are being fulfilled. And this is consistent with a time where the King of Kings and Lord of Lords is going to visit the earth. And indeed, I believe that he's coming again, first to meet the church in the air, then 7 years later with the church to end the battle of Armageddon and establish his kingdom and rule and reign in righteousness for 1,000 years. So exciting times for us to be alive. And we shouldn't let these stories discourage us. They should, encourage us and enlighten us, to the lateness of the hour. And as I always like to exhort you and encourage you, let these things that we talk about be a motivation to tell people about Jesus, because he's the only way to escape hell and the tribulation period. And that's kind of a bonus thrown in. I'm glad we won't have anything to do with that. But most of all, it changes our eternal destiny when we come into a personal relationship with him. Now, where we started with our first story in Joseph's tomb and the desecration of that sacred site to the Jews. Now, here's a pair of stories I think that are interesting that feed into what we just said. Breitbart says that Islamists are mercilessly, there's three stories actually, killing Christians in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Islamic extremists raided the village of Masambo in the northeastern province of North Kivu in the Democratic Republic of the Congo on April 3rd, according to the Barnabas Fund. The raid by jihadists from the Allied Democratic Forces, a group allied to the Islamic State, is just one episode in a flood of Islamist violence across the North Kivu and its neighboring province of Ituri, Barnabas noted in an email on Tuesday. It is a miracle I survived, said Masambo resident Kakuli Saane. We were already in bed when we heard the sound of boots outside and bullets. It was after hearing victims' cries that we realized it was a rebel raid. Saani said that 21 dead bodies were found following the attack, which was carried out with machetes and guns, and the figure has risen since to 28 killed. The ADF carried out a series of attacks in multiple villages during March of 2022, killing more than 50 people in Ituri and at least another 30 in North Kivu. Soldiers from the Congolese army forces are seen in their forward operating bases. There's a picture here that obviously I can't show you. And in Virunga National Park, where a camp of ADF members live and hide, and the town had been attacked multiple times by the ADF, and many civilians killed and some beheaded. Now, that's interesting in light of what we know is going to happen during the tribulation. So we've got Islamists in the Congo killing Christians. Now, two more stories along these lines, and then we'll make a point. Al Jazeera says in India, Muslims see a wave of attacks, hate speech on Hindu festival. Excuse me. Muslims in several Indian states are on edge after mobs came out in processions, making hate speeches and attacking their properties during the Hindu festival of Ram Navami. Most of the violence reported in the states of Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, and Jharkhand, and West Bengal on Sunday as a Hindu community celebrated the birthday of the god Ram, one of the religion's chief deities, Jai Shri Ram. Is a chant that has lately become a rallying cry, meaning Hail Lord Ram, by right wing Hindu groups as they target Muslims and other minorities. Dozens of videos have been going viral on Indian social media since Sunday, showing processions of Hindu men wearing saffron scarves and in some cases carrying sticks and swords, stopping their motorcycles in Muslim neighborhoods, playing provocative songs laced with threats of genocide outside homes and mosques, and raising hate slogans. In one of the videos, purportedly from the eastern state of Bihar's Muzaffarpur district, a man was seen climbing a mosque wall and planting a saffron flag on its entrance as others cheered, flashing swords and hockey sticks. Al Jazeera was not independently able to verify the authenticity of those videos, but one gentleman, a resident of Khargon, told Al Jazeera on Tuesday that a mosque in the Sarafa Bazaar area was set on fire by a Hindu mob on Sunday night during the Ram Navami procession. Now, our next story shows exactly the opposite happening within the same country, also comes from Breitbart, and multiple states impose curfews after Muslims attack Hindu processions. Violent clashes between Muslims and Hindus broke out across Indian states of Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and Jharkhand on Sunday after local observances of a Hindu religious festival, prompting authorities in two of the three states to impose curfews or gathering bans later on Sunday, according to the Times of India. Communities across Hindu-majority India held celebrations on April 10th to honor the birth of Hindu Lord Ram, as we read in our last story. And the incident happened in the afternoon when Ram Navami procession was passing through a Muslim-majority locality named Chapira. The procession was attacked when the Hindu religious procession reached the Muslim-dominated area. Several vehicles, which were part of the Ram Navami procession, were damaged in the attack, and one open Jeep was burned by the attackers. A separate but similar incident occurred in the Gujarat city of Kambat, located roughly 100 miles north of that same area on April 10th. And Kambat Muslims attacked a local Ram procession with stones and incited violence that killed at least one person, according to local reports. Police in Kambat confirmed on April 11th that they had arrested 9 people involved in the unrest, including Hindu priest, and more than 35 people were wounded in yet another Muslim attack on a Ram procession in the state of Madhya Pradesh on April 10th. And these stories, according to the Times of India. Now, let's wrap in one more story. I'm sorry, I forgot I added this at the last moment. Times of Israel is reporting 6 extremist Jews arrested for planning animal sacrifice atop the Temple Mount. 6 Jews in their 20s were arrested Thursday morning after police suspected they were planning to sacrifice a goat at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem's Old City ahead of Passover. The suspects, residents of Jerusalem and Jewish settlements in the West Bank, were detained and taken in for questioning after police found a goat in one of the suspects' home. The, quote, returning to the Mount, unquote, extremist group, which advocates the construction of a third Jewish temple on the site that once housed the 2 biblical temples, have circulated a flyer offering a cash prize to anyone who managed to offer a living sacrifice on the Temple Mount and to anyone arrested trying to do so. The Returning to the Mount group said that in addition to the arrests, a number of their members have received phone calls from Shin Bet warning them not to proceed with their plans. And despite all this, the goats are on their way to Jerusalem, and Israeli authorities have vowed to stop any attempts to bring sacrificial animals to the complex, as they have in years past. And according to police, false information is being distributed online regarding the Temple Mount, alongside publications encouraging extremist entities to be arrested by police attempting to reach the site and conduct legal activities. Now, we talk a lot about the fact that the world is going to be governed by a single governing body headed up by the Antichrist. Revelation 17 and 18 talks about the fact that there will be others along his side who help to rule the world, but there will be a single form of governance over the world during the tribulation period. And whoever refuses to take the mark or the number of his name or his name on their right hand or forehead will not be able to conduct business during the tribulation. And we also know that there's going to be a centralized religious system, at least for a time. And there is going to be this movement to unify all world religions. And we all see these coexist stickers and T-shirts floating around where all religions need to get along. And basically, the stories we've just covered shows the mentality of what's developing in the world today and the hatred between religions and wanting to snuff them all out, each wanting to do the other end, so to speak. And this is going to play into what happens during the tribulation period. And we're going to see the ultimate in this when we see the nations named in Ezekiel 38 and 39 invade Israel, and they are destroyed by God himself. 5/6 of the, according to the King James, 5/6 of the armies will lay dead on the mountains around Israel. It'll take 7 months to bury the dead, 7 years to burn the weapons, and these other things that we know about that particular battle. But what we also know is that this is going to lead to the covenant that Israel is going to make with the Antichrist, and also allow them to build their temple. And the reason I wanted to tie all these stories together is because, one, here you've got a group of Jews who are wanting to do what the Bible tells them to do, or the Tanakh tells them to do, and that is to offer sacrifices as a covering for their sin. And, that's one of the big problems. If you ask a Jew today, what are you doing about covering your sin? What are you doing for dealing with those things that you've done in error and in conflict with God's word? And, that's what the whole sacrificial system was about. But we know that it was pointing to the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus, the blood that's better than that of bulls and goats that we're going to celebrate and commemorate this weekend, the final sacrifice offered once and for all. But they don't believe in Jesus. They don't believe, the Jews, the majority, don't believe that he is the Messiah, the Mashiach ben David. And so they still are under a sacrificial system in their minds. So here you've got this group of people who want to do what their book says. You've got these other groups that want to do what their religions dictate. And the world is going to tire of all this, and many people already are. And that's why we see this radical movement towards atheism and the growth of this anti-religion movement. And now, you read stories like Muslims killing Christians, Hindus killing Muslims, Muslims killing Hindus, Jews trying to sacrifice on their Temple Mount, potentially creating a World War III scenario with the Muslim community against Israel. All these other things are pointing to the fact that there is going to be a day where the world is unified under a religious system, at least temporarily. But we have to remember that Revelation 17 says that the beast and the false prophet hate the woman who rides the beast, the false religion of the world, and they seek to destroy her. So, we're watching all these things develop, and we're seeing this aggression rise in these last days that will be fulfilled again, like I said, during the tribulation period. But we're watching precursor after precursor after precursor developing in such a time as this. Now, here's a few interesting stories, and this is kind of a game changer, and that's what the headline reads for Israel and the constant threat of attacks that they have against them. And the Times of Israel says, and a game changer, Israeli laser-based air defense shoots down drones. Officials hail Iron Beam system after successful interceptions of guided and unguided projectiles, Gantz says. All efforts being made for early deployment of this new weapon system. The Defense Ministry revealed Thursday that a laser air defense system it is developing successfully shot down drones, rockets, mortars, and anti-tank missiles in a first series of tests last month. According to the head of the ministry's research and development team, Brigadier General Yaniv Rotem, the tests were conducted at challenging rates and timings. The use of a laser is a game changer, and the technology is simple to operate and proves to be economically viable, he said. In a video released by the ministry, the laser based system can be seen intercepting a rocket, a mortar, and a drone at an undisclosed location in southern Israel's Negev desert during March of this year. The ministry has been testing the laser based defense system for several years, shooting down a drone with it last year, and the recent tests were the first to be successful against the other threats, including unguided projectiles and anti tank guided missiles. And the latter was not shown in the footage released by the ministry, the article says. Its research and development department initially planned to deploy the anti-missile system by 2024, but the military has pushed for an earlier deployment. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett announced in February that Israel would deploy the system within the year. Now, I think this is interesting because this is a game changer. And, basically when you eliminate, the opposition's opportunity, and the article went on to say, it made mention of the 130,000 rockets that are pointed at Israel from Lebanon, as well as the Palestinian Islamic Jihad possessing up to 4,000 projectiles or 4,000 projectiles they fired at Israel last year. And now to have the ability to take them out through a economically viable defense system, basically, is something that the enemies of Israel cannot afford. Now, could this be a catalyst to motivate groups like the Iranians or Hezbollah? Of course, Hamas would love to see the end of Israel, as would Fatah. But could this potentially be something that speeds up the process and their efforts and causes them to go more aggressive than they're ready to be? Who knows? But interesting development in Israel's self-defense tactics. And we know ultimately, according to Amos, once the Jews are back in the land, they will not be uprooted again. They are going to remain in the land. They're going to be supernaturally protected by God because every day that they were outside the land of Israel, the name of the Lord was profaned. And so now here they are back in the land. God is watching over them and will continue to do so. And even the believing Jews he'll protect throughout the whole of the tribulation. Now, here's an interesting story. I wanted to include this. It's a bit lengthy and a bit cranial in some parts, but we'll go ahead and work our way through a good portion of the article because I believe that there is going to be some geomagnetic storm during the tribulation period recorded in Revelation chapter 16. And this article comes from SciTech Daily. And the headline reads, a massive geomagnetic storm or a coronal mass ejection from the sun could knock out the power grid and the internet. That's talking about the whole world. On September 1 and 2 of 1859, telegram systems around the world failed catastrophically. The operators of the telegraphs reported receiving electrical shocks. Telegraph paper caught fire, and being able to operate equipment with batteries disconnected. In other words, there was no power supply, but yet the machine still worked. During the evenings, the aurora borealis, more commonly known as the northern lights, could be seen as far south as Colombia, South America. Typically, these lights are only visible at higher latitudes in North Canada, Scandinavia, and Siberia. What the world experienced that day, now known as the Carrington event, was a massive geomagnetic storm. And these storms occur when a large bubble of superheated gas called plasma is ejected from the surface of the sun and hits the Earth. This bubble is known as a coronal mass ejection. The plasma of a coronal mass ejection consists of a cloud of protons and electrons, which are electrically charged particles. When these particles reach the Earth, they interact with the magnetic field that surrounds the planet. This interaction causes the magnetic field to distort and weaken, which in turn leads to the strange behavior of the aurora borealis and other natural phenomena. As an electrical engineer who specializes in the power grid, the author says, I study how geomagnetic storms also threaten to cause power and internet outages and how to protect against that. And the Carrington event of 1859 is the largest recorded account of a geomagnetic storm, but it is not an isolated event. Geomagnetic storms have been recorded since the early 19th century, and scientific data from the Antarctic ice core samples have shown evidence of an even more massive geomagnetic storm that occurred around 774 AD, now known as the Miyake event. The solar flare produced the largest and fastest rise in carbon 14 ever recorded. Geomagnetic storms trigger high amounts of cosmic rays in the Earth's upper atmosphere, which in turn produce carbon 14, a radioactive isotope of carbon. A geomagnetic storm, 60% smaller than the Miyake event, occurred around 993 AD, and ice core samples have shown evidence of large scale geomagnetic storms with similar intensities as the Miyake and Carrington events, occurring about once every 500 years. Nowadays, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration uses the geomagnetic storm scale to measure the strength of these solar eruptions through the G scale, with a rating from 1 to 5, G1 being minor and G5 being extreme. The Carrington event would have been rated G5. It gets even scarier when you compare the Carrington event to the Miyake event. Scientists were able to estimate the strength of the Carrington event based on the fluctuations of the Earth's magnetic field as recorded by observatories at the time. There was no way to measure the magnetic fluctuations of the Miyake event. Instead, scientists measured the increase in carbon 14 in tree rings from that time period. The Miyake event produced a 12% increase in carbon 14, and by comparison, the Carrington event produced a less than 1% increase in carbon 14. The Miyake event likely dwarfed the G5 Carrington event. Now, the article goes on to say, and there's much more we could read about it, and I find this to be interesting in light of the fact Revelation 16 says the sun will be given the power to scorch men's bodies. And we also know that there's a lot of things that take place during the tribulation period that happen through, antiquated warfare systems, basically on horseback. And, why we made the point before, why in Revelation 16 would the Euphrates River need to be dried up for the kings of the East when we have all of these things that we're talking about today, and the mechanized warfare, the laser weapons, the defense weapons, the planes, the drones, all these things that we have at our disposal today. Why would a river need to dry up for an army to cross over unless there in Revelation 16 was a geomagnetic storm that disabled all the Earth's electronic equipment? And the article does go on to say it's only a matter of time before Earth is hit by another geomagnetic storm. A Carrington event-sized storm would be extremely damaging to the electrical and communication systems worldwide, outages lasting into weeks. And a storm, if it were the size of the Miyake event, the results would be catastrophic for the world, with potential outages lasting months and even longer. I believe it's critical, the article says, to continue researching ways to protect electrical systems against the effects of geomagnetic storms, for example, by installing devices that could shield vulnerable equipment like transformers, and by developing strategies for adjusting grid loads when storms are about to hit. So interesting that this scientific website is mentioning, it's not when or if, but when this is going to happen because they're a regular part of the Earth's history. And interesting, another potential reminder, kind of a mental shot across the bow, if you will, about what's going to happen during the tribulation, I believe. Now, another interesting story, as I've said in time past, I'll repeat it again today. I believe that there'll be a geomagnetic storm, probably a G5, or if there is such a thing as greater, during the tribulation period. I do believe there's also a asteroid strike, described as a mountain burning with fire, falling into the sea, or being actually thrown into the sea, not falling from the shore into the sea, but being thrown into the sea from outside our system. And I also believe there's a comet strike described as wormwood, which makes a third of the world's drinking waters radioactive or made bitter. Now, not saying in this next story that this is the comet that's going to strike, but this is worth noting because it reminds us of things that are out there that we don't know anything about. And the Daily Beast is reporting that it turns out the mega comet is more than 80 miles wide and it's headed our way. Last year, the monstrous Bernardinelli Bernstein comet, also known as C 2014 UN 271, was discovered by the University of Pennsylvania astronomers Gary Bernstein and Pedro Bernardinelli. The pair called it the nearly spherical cow of comets in their paper about the discovery, but it wasn't long until the world dubbed it the mega comet for being an absolute unit of a space object. While the mega comet fell out of the main space news spotlight, NASA astronomers set the Hubble telescope sights on the object in the months since and discovered how truly immense it is. And a new paper published in the Astrophysical Journal Letters on Tuesday confirmed that the Bernardinelli Bernstein has a nucleus, or the icy core that is at the center of all comets, is more than 80 miles wide. That's 50 times larger than any other comet ever observed. The comet is literally, the article says, at the tip of the iceberg for many thousands of comets are too faint to see in more distant parts of the solar system. According to David Jewett, a professor of planetary science and astronomy at UCLA, and a co-author of the study, we've always suspected this comet had to be big because it's so bright at such a far distance, and now we can confirm it is. Even with the imagery provided by Hubble, scientists still had their work cut out for them in sussing out its precise size. After all, the megacomet is still incredibly far away. Now, disconcertingly, the megacomet is on an interstellar road trip that will bring it right through our solar system in 2031. Luckily for us, it's not expected to get any closer than a billion miles away from the sun, passing between Saturn and Uranus' respective orbits. But again, when you have something of that size, getting involved with planets with large gravitational pulls, who knows what could happen? But I think it's interesting that now they're talking about this massive 80-mile wide ice core comet, far larger than anything they've ever seen. And it would take something of that magnitude to survive the entrance into the Earth's atmosphere and to basically disperse its radioactive isotopes all over the world and poison a third of the world's drinking waters. But again, science is out there taking a look at what's happening outside of our galaxy or outside of our solar system. And this massive, massive comet, biggest ever seen, is headed our way. Now, a billion miles, obviously, is pretty safe distance from our sun. But again, like I said, passing by a mega planet like Saturn and its gravitational pull, it could definitely change the trajectory of this without question. And we know that that happens all the time. And we have to remember that's part of why our moon is out there to pick off some of these rogue asteroids. And that's why it's got such a pitted and mucked surface, because it does exactly what its job is. It grabs things that could be headed towards Earth and draws them through its own gravitational pull and uses it as kind of a buffer for the planet. But you get something of this size, and the moon's gravitational forces or influence will have absolutely no impact. Now, moving on, we know that there's going to be a rise in pestilence. And of course, we've all talked about what we've been enduring with this recent pandemic. And now, Fauci came out and made a comment that, it seems like there's another variant looming out there and America just doesn't seem to care. And, maybe if the people in places of power would be honest about all of the facts and quit trying to influence people and force them to do things against their will, maybe there'd be a little more of a trust factor in people who should be trusted, who have sworn and taken an oath to watch out for the health of those they care for. Now, the BBC is reporting the Zika virus may be one step away from an explosive outbreak. A new outbreak of Zika virus is quite possible, warn researchers, with a single mutation potentially enough to trigger an explosive spread. Now, again, one of the components that we know is part of this last stage scenario and the control mechanism in the world that people in places of power have had to use is fear. Now, there's nothing that says that Zika is spreading. There's nothing in this article that says this mutation has happened, but they are just kind of, again, fear mongering, trying to make sure everybody is on edge. A single mutation potentially would be enough to trigger an explosive spread. We know that viruses do mutate, and but we also know generally they mutate downward into a less lethal form. But if you're going to keep the fear factor up, as people aren't afraid, at least to the level they were of the coronavirus, now you've got to reintroduce the Zika virus. And the disease caused a global medical emergency in 2016, with thousands of babies born brain damaged after their moms became infected while pregnant. U.S. scientists say the world should be on the lookout for new mutations, and lab work described in the journal Cell Reports suggests the virus could easily shift. It hasn't, but it could, creating new variants. And we've all become familiar with the term variant through this whole COVID deal. And U.S. scientists, again, say the world should be looking out for this because recent infection studies suggest those variants may prove to be effective at transmitting the virus, even in countries which have built up immunity from the previous outbreaks of Zika. This is from the team at the La Jolla Institute for Immunology here in Southern California. Experts said the findings, although theoretical, were interesting and a reminder that viruses other than COVID could pose a threat. Might, could, all these other things. And again, what would be the point of this article to the non-medical community? I mean, this is the BBC reporting this out to the masses to give them something else to worry about. Well, I don't know. I had COVID and I got over it, but now I got to watch out for the Zika virus. But again, Zika is being spread by infected Aedes mosquitoes. The insects are found throughout the Americas, except for Canada and Chile, where it's too cold for them to survive, and across Asia. And for most people, Zika is a mild illness with no lasting effects, but it can have catastrophic consequences for babies in the womb. If a mother contracts the virus during pregnancy, it can harm the developing baby, causing microcephaly, an unusually small head, and damaged brain tissue. And although the virus is mostly spread by mosquitoes, it can also be sexually transmitted. And few people die of Zika, and only 1 in 5 infected is thought to develop symptoms. And these can include a fever, rash, joint pain. Since there's no treatment, the only option is to reduce the risk of being bitten. Scientists have begun work on a Zika vaccine to help protect pregnant women. And again, of course, the negative effects are catastrophic, and what a tragic thing to have happen. But again, I find it sadly bizarre that these people that are so concerned about sparing the life of the unborn child also promote and protect killing the unborn child in the womb. And what a messed up world we live in. And aren't you glad Jesus is coming to get us out of here? And, as I've said before, I think everybody, laughs at the rapture believing, pre-tribulation rapture believing Christian and says all you want to do is escape. And that's right. I do want to escape the things that are coming upon the world, and we can be made worthy to escape them through the blood of Jesus. So we'll commemorate this weekend around the world. The Guardian says U.S. sexually transmitted infections surged to a record high in 2020 after briefly dropping in the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Rates of sexually transmitted infections then resurged to beyond 2019 levels to finish the year at a record high, according to new data from the CDC. Researchers with the CDC said its report, 2020 Sexually Transmitted Disease Surveillance, shows how COVID-19 disrupted in-person healthcare and diverted scarce public health resources away from STIs, which have been on the rise for years. Ultimately, diverting resources to COVID-19 caused young people, racial minorities, and gay and bisexual men to suffer disproportionately from new infections, it said. The new data provides the clearest picture yet of the impact of the COVID-19 on STIs, according to Dr. Jonathan Merman, director of the CDC's National Center for HIV, Viral Hepatitis, STD, and Tuberculosis Prevention. Honestly, there's just much to be done. The article goes on to state specific increases in uh, by statistics, or by a percentage, I should say, of different STDs, and we won't go in to all that. But again, pestilence, one of the things Jesus mentioned, will be on the rise and a birth pang-like progression around the world when it's time for him to come back for us. Blaze Media says a preschool teacher and polyamorous gender fluid witch goes viral for admitting how she teaches her young students about sexuality and identity. A preschool teacher, keep that in your mind. A preschool teacher has gone viral on social media after describing how she teaches her young, impressionable students about her personal life, including the fact that the teacher is polyamorous, gender fluid, not identifying as either female or male, and that she is a pagan witch. The teacher, who, according to the Post Millennial, goes by the name Lois Schwartz, recently shared a video in which she bragged about her woke students and their informal education on human sexuality. Again, preschool and formal education on human sexuality in preschool. Man, y'all thought me teaching about teaching the children about me being poly was crazy. But not only that, they also know that I'm gender fluid, she said in the video. At one point last year, I'd explained to them that I was not Miss Lois or Mr. Lois. I'm just Lois because I'm not a boy or a girl. And this was all well and good until October, when I also explained to them that I'm pagan, so I'm also a witch. She continued, and at one point I got a haircut. I had gotten the sides of my mohawk shaved, and I come into work, and one of the children goes, "Lois, are you a boy? You have short hair." And his sister goes, "No, Lois is a girl." And a third child, who is my favorite, suddenly yells, "No, guys, we've been over this. Lois isn't a boy or a girl. Lois is a witch. Duh." The video, posted by Libs of TikTok Twitter account, was captioned, "The polyamorous gender fluid witch is a preschool teacher in Florida. She's so proud of herself that she discusses her gender and sexuality with 4-year-olds." Now, this is the kind of stuff that used to get you arrested, and now it's bragged about and posted on social media where hundreds of thousands and millions of people can see it. And I think that the American education system has completely been taken over by leftists, according to one Twitter comment who was not identified. From the top down, we have the school board, the superintendent, the teachers, the staff, and it has become completely taken over in the last few years. So what we're seeing is the push for the woke agenda, which includes the sexual stuff and the critical race theory and even some anti-American propaganda. We're seeing all of that being incorporated into all of the schools, which are run by crazy leftists. And indeed, again, it's just so strange that this is not creating the arrest of this teacher to be talking about sexuality with not just minors, but preschoolers, and obviously under the banner of indoctrination. But that's the way our world is today. The minority, or the tail is wagging the dog, and the minority portion of our society is running things, and the majority is being forced to go along. And that will bring us to our final story, and this comes from Just the News. Air Force officer faces court-martial over religious objection to the vaccine mandate. The Air Force officer can either face a court-martial or be punished by forfeiting rank or pay or working extra duty for refusing the COVID-19 vaccine. An Air Force officer is facing a trial by court-martial for refusing a COVID-19 vaccination after both his request for a religious exemption from the military vaccine mandate and his appeal were denied. The Air Force served Master Sergeant Vincent White an Article 15 non-judicial punishment on Wednesday, which is the most severe military punishment below a court-martial. If an airman accepts the Article 15 punishment, then the Air Force could immediately take away his rank or pay or assign him extra duty. However, an airman can instead decline to accept the punishment, request a trial by court-martial instead, which is what White has chosen. The Air Force then will have to either go to trial or rescind the Article 15 punishment. After being ordered to receive the COVID vaccine, White, who is a Christian, submitted a religious accommodation request, or an RAR, for an exemption from the vaccine mandate. That request was denied. Subsequently, White was again ordered to get the vaccine and then filed an RAR appeal, and that was denied. And he received a letter of reprimand. And when a letter of reprimand is upheld, it can effectively end an airman's military career by blocking him from promotion. Following a second order to get the vaccine and refusing to do so, White received a second LOR, letter of reprimand. After he responded to the LOR, he was served the Article 15 punishment. The third order for White to get the vaccine reads, "This will be my third order for you to receive the COVID-19 vaccine with full licensure approval from the FDA and provide proof." And again, this is our military we're talking about that are being forced to take something that maybe, they in their conscience cannot accept, or maybe there's medical reasons, or maybe with this gentleman, as we see, there's religious reasons where he does not feel the conviction to take this and feels like he'd be dishonoring his beliefs to do so. And yet the military sees themselves in a role that is even above one's religious convictions. And again, this just tells us how far our country and our world has fallen and how bizarre this is. And I think one of the hard things about this particular story is basically because of what we do know about what's happening with the vaccines. And there's no question, and it's not conspiracy theory that the vaccines have killed people, because they have. And so they're telling this man, you have to risk your life to take something that won't protect you from COVID anyway. Because people with the vaccine get COVID uh, all over again, or maybe for the first time, regardless of how many boosters they've had. And that's a fact, and it's not denied. So they make the claim that the vaccine reduces the severity of the disease, which that's not what vaccines do. They either stop it or they don't. They don't reduce the severity of anything. That's not even medically sound to say that. So again, looking at the world we live in, we're seeing that the government is trying to take control, force people to make health decisions based on what they think is the right thing to do. And, this whole thing we had happen on our vacation where we got stuck in Atlanta for 2 days. And, there were different stories presented. We were told because there was a storm at our final destination, but yet on the same night, my son and his family flew into the same city that we couldn't get to. And the later flights in the day, they flew into the same city, but it was just all ours, and for whatever window of time it was, a few hours. And there were those who reported that it was a pilot shortage because the airlines had laid off so many pilots for not taking the jab, so to speak. So again, control is everything. We are in the last of the last days, I believe. And all these things we've been talking about, all these precursors, is just reminding us that our redemption is nigh. Jesus is coming soon. And you think about the one component that we share that no other Christian has experienced for the last 2,000 years, and that is there is an Israel, and they do have possession of Jerusalem. And these are prophetic necessities for the other things to happen that the Bible talks about are going to happen both during the tribulation and what brings it to an end, as well as the Ezekiel war and all the other things that we see. Israel can't be invaded if there's no Israel, and yet here we are watching the aggressors gather together and be in coalition together, actively participating on the northern border of Israel, where the hook will be put in their jaw and they'll be drawn down and then basically eliminated via earthquake and flooding rain and hailstones of fire mingled with blood by God Himself. And He will defeat the adversaries of Israel. And the protesting nations, the Arab Gulf states, are already working on their relationship with Israel. Much of it because of their animosity towards the Iranians, their shared animosity towards the Iranians. But it doesn't matter what the motivation is. The fact is, it's happening. And that tells us that it's time for us to keep our heads lifted up, to be about the Father's business and tell people about Jesus. And listen, here we are, and we make light of this, but and there's little jokes and adages. We talk about CEOs, Christian, Christmas and Easter only people that only come to church on those two occasions. And you know what? People are expecting And many people do go to church only on Christmas and Easter. So let's throw the invitation out and find, if you're blessed to go to a Bible teaching church and one that's going to share the gospel and the true good news that the world so desperately needs to hear, invite them to church. Step out. And, we have to remember, according to the parable of the soils, our responsibility is to sow, not to succeed. And you're going to get turned down. And if you use that parable as an example, 3 out of 4 times you're going to get turned down. But there are going to be those who say yes, but you won't know if you don't ask. So invite some people to church, or better yet, just tell them about Jesus yourself and lead them to Christ yourself. And then they can come to church as a brother or sister and be part of the family. So anyway, I wish you a very blessed weekend. And again, I covet your prayers. I really hope for a quick recovery. And this is one of those things when you've been through it before, and remember it, even though it was a decade ago. You remember it like it was yesterday. It's not something to look forward to, but I'm looking forward to the health on the other side of it, and being able. Many of you who follow us on Instagram know my wife and I have some wonderful areas that we go out and walk in and see lots of wildlife and bobcats and deer and snakes and other stuff. In our local area. And yeah, that's right here in Southern California, Orange County of all places. But they're looking forward to getting back to that. I've basically been on the bench for about a year and a half since all this has happened. But anyway, next Wednesday, April 20th, about 8:30 in the morning, I'll be going into surgery to have my left hip replaced. And it's a full replacement for those who are in the know about these kind of things. And I would appreciate your prayers. And I hope to see you at the outside 2 weeks. If not, it's going to be 3, or as soonest could be 2 weeks. If not, it's going to be 3, depending on how I feel. So anyway, covet your prayers, and Lord bless you. And who knows, maybe I won't need surgery because I'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless you.